Yes people, I'm Ryan Nichols and today we're going to be breaking down my remix of EVIE's track titled 3 Beats. This release saw a lot of support over the summer from the likes of Josh Baker, ALISHA and EVIE, just to name a few. It's definitely been one of EVIE's most sought after records, so I was delighted when she asked me to come along and put my own spin on it. Today I'm going to be showing you how I did exactly that. We're going to be covering everything from how I approached the remix, right through to putting a DJ master on at the end so the track was ready for the clubs. I hope you enjoy, and with all that being said, let's get into the video. So I've got the project in front of me now and you can see how we've started to break down each of the sort of sections really. I think the first thing I want to do is if I kind of play it from halfway through the breakdown and give you an idea of what the track sounds like, and then we can take it from there. So that's it for the track really. Really cool track. I really do like this one, to be fair. And I think, to be honest, the best place to start off with is in the stems. And the reason for that is because this is a remix, right? So I had to really have an idea of what I wanted to do with this before I got into writing it, because there was some kind of rules that I had to follow, if you like, because there were some parts that I had to use with it being a remix. So if we have a look through the stems section here, you'll see all of the bits and pieces that EVIE had sent over for me to use. So there's the bass line from the original, and we've got the
free beats. Get the f out of here, out of here, out of here.
So we've got all these different bits and pieces that we've got. And what I kind of did really was started off here and focused on what I can do to flip those a little bit so they're not the exact same as the original. I wanted to kind of have my own spin on it really. And a really cool way to do that really was to just chop bits and pieces up. So obviously we've got
free beats. Get the f out of here, out of here, out of here.
I really liked the out of here at the end, which is what you would have heard if we just go back into this part when the track was playing. So all I've done really was just basically sampled the last part of that part here to sort of get the out of here bit. I just looped it and flipped it a little bit, and you'll notice that I have a phaser tan on that as well. And that's just swirling it around quite nicely in the background. Here it is. So you can see that's kind of doing some nice sort of swirling motion in the background. Really like phasers for things like that. And then what I did there was took it one step further really, and then brought Tantra in. And if I play it with the Tantra on, it kind of, I literally, to be honest with you, just flicked through the presets with this roll the dice button here until I landed on something that sounded quite cool. And then what I did was literally just created a audio track like that, set the audio in from the out of here channel like this, and then basically that then recorded everything that comes in. So if I just do this, so we can end up with some quite cool little like chops there like that. And these all ended up on this resonant textures channel. Sorry, it ended up in the Vox textures. That's where it ended up. A little bit of a messy project there, I guess. And all I've done there is, there's a little bit of a clip in there to be fair, so that's pretty bad chopping up from me, but you'll just see that in the envelopes I've literally just set the clip and turned down all the bits I didn't want and chopped out the bits that I do want. And to be honest with you, what you should probably do is do something that's a little bit more like this to stop that clip, because the abruptness there is creating a little clip, which can cause problems in the mix. But when you play that with the vocal,
Free beats. Get the fuck out of here. Out of here. Out of here. Free beats. Get the fuck out of here.
it's just quite a nice little texture that runs in the background that I really quite liked. So that was kind of the idea behind these. There was a couple of things like the wobble basses and stuff that I didn't use, but I had a play with them to see if I could, make them work for me. And to be fair, it didn't really need them. So in the end, we just ended up using bits and pieces from the original and just chopping them up, really. So I really liked this breathing vocal here as well. Which, again, I've just basically resampled from the spoken word that came in and just flipped it a little bit just to put my own kind of spin on the track, really. Another thing that I did with the spoken word is, if you know EVIE, you know that she's really into her old school garage. She draws a lot of influences from there. And I kind of wanted to pay a little bit of homage to that in the remix. So a classic technique was time stretching. So you'll see kind of in the vocal here, I've really stretched this breathing part. If we just have a listen. And again, I feel like that was quite a cool little touch, just again to pay a little homage to the kind of garage roots of where this track was kind of influenced from. And a really easy way to do that is just in the warp mode. You can move your markers and stretch it really far. That's pretty much as far as it will go. And if you set it to texture, it'll give you that real nice stretched feeling rather than like beats. See, that's not as cool, but texture, it's a bit smoother. You'll notice there's a bit of a gate on there as well. So I used a shaper box for that. And I used this throughout the track, really. So I just kind of set the volume to start high and come down. And we set it to play on the 16ths. And that just comes kind of in and out. So if we have a look at where the automation is for that, you'll see that it comes on towards the end. And it just gives that little... And obviously we've used a bit of noise and drive as well, which carries it nicely into the next section. So yeah, that was a little technique that I've used throughout this track, to be fair, on the synths and stuff, just to add a little bit of flavour to them, really. So I think that's pretty much it for the stems. I wanted to start there because, as I say, it's a remix, so I kind of had to start flipping some bits and pieces to give me an idea of where I'm going to go. So the next thing that we're going to look at is the drums. So obviously once I'd had an idea of what I was going to do with the stems, I wanted to just get a little groove going behind. So the quickest way to do this really was to use a couple of these top loops. So I took these out of the Best Service pack, I believe. I think the Dance, Mega House Dance. So I took these out of there, and it was just to get an initial groove going. So we've got the first one here. It's kind of like a tick-tock. I've got a little bit of a phaser on it that's making it a little bit more interesting as well, which is here. That's it without. So that's just moving it around a little bit. Then we got another one. Again, I've got a feeling that's from the same pack. I will show you. Let's have a look. Yeah, Best Service Dance Mega House. And this one, I've got a kickstart on just side chaining it, just to get rid of the kick. The side chain's taking a lot of stuff. We're just leaving a couple of little hits, and then we've got this phased loop here. So this loop, if I get up where that one's from, this one's from this Zephyr progressive break, so it's just a breaks loop. And I've obviously got a couple of things on this, so I'll just take those off so we can listen to it first. I've put a transient shaper on it to make it a little bit sort of, to get it out the way of the main drums a little bit, really. So with loops, I like to really take the attack off. So I'm using the transients from my own drums. And then these are just being set back a little bit, just so that you haven't got loads of transients hitting at the same time, getting a really sharp sound and really sort of making your drum sound messy. Next thing, I've got a phaser tan. Again, I use this quite a lot on this track with an iRobot preset. That's just swirling those around. And a kickstart, just to give it a bit of a pump. And a side chain here as well, which isn't doing a fat lot. But so they're the groove for the loops. Next, we just added a clap. So I'll kind of just add these in as we go. So we've got a snare kind of underneath the hand clap. And what I've done here is I've used little offbeat hits as well. And I've just used the same snare for that, just so it all sounds a little bit more glued together. And the idea here is we have this snare, if we just bring up a span on the master quickly. So this is all about layering, right? So the idea here, we've got quite a lot of energy kind of low down on this one. And when I add that one, if we look at this one, you've got a lot going on kind of in this region, and you've got a lot more lower stuff going on this one. So the two together makes for a fuller sound. If I take that snare out, it's a bit thin. So you're getting a little bit more weight behind that. And that's just all about sample selection. The key thing here is just picking good sounds to start with. So again, I'm happy to show you what we've used here in my drum rack. So I've just used, I might be able to find out what that one is. And then for my clap, I've used this DP clap, which I think, again, is out of this Dance Mega Drum. So I use this pack a lot for this track. I really like that pack. Which then brings us on to the hats. So similar thing really. If we just have a look at this one, we've got a closed hat. Not really doing anything interesting. Another one for a groove. This one here with a phaser on it, you can hear that swirling around. A 909 open hat, sounds really gritty that. And I've used this RX 950 on it. So this, you can see that we've literally got it down to 10,000 hertz as kind of like a low pass. So take that off. There's a lot of highs there, which we've shaved off because we're going to allow the other hats to take up that space. So again, when we talk about layering, if I bring the span up again, if we have a look at a lot of space is being occupied here by that one. And a lot of space is being occupied here by the other one. So if we play the two together, makes it all a little bit more full. We're using the high end off this hat to boost around here, whereas if we took this off, it all starts getting a little bit tinny. So I use that. It's a really nice plug-in. This, it's like an analog converter, so it makes everything sound a little bit more analog, really, I guess is the aim behind it. And then we've got an 808. So I took this out of my TR8, which is just here. And it's just an 808 open hat. And you can see we've brought the width right down because it was a little bit weird coming out the TR8, and then used this wider plug-in by Infected Mushroom to kind of spread that out a little bit. You can see how wide that's getting now. So yeah, we just put that in, and then obviously that's got quite a lot of reverb on it. You can hear it being sent, and then just an EQ just to take out some of this resonance here that I didn't like. Then a couple of shakers. This one, I've used this in so many different tracks. It's out of a Chris Stussy pack. It's out of the Sample Magic Chris Stussy pack, and it's just got so much weight. It just sits really nicely. If I take that out, listen to the hats as a whole. Just a bit more presence, really. I just had to turn it up to make it a little bit more obvious. With stuff like that, I tend to back them out of the mix a little bit. So altogether, The drums are sounding, obviously I've got a little bit of processing on the loops and the group, on that loops group, but nothing else. And then I've got the drums all processed together in a group. So on here, we've got the I love this channel strip. I've covered this on a previous video before, so it's just giving us a little bit of saturation, a little bit of compression here, and we've boosted some of the frequencies as well, just to give it a little bit more. So if I solo these drums and take that off, just putting a bit of life into them. Next up, we've got an EQ, which is just to take some of the high ends out. Funnily enough, the feedback from the mastering engineer on this was that there wasn't enough high end, so that's probably because I took it all out in the pre. And then what I've done on this one is, you'll see a lot of people kind of like do that on there to get rid of the lows, but instead on this one, there was quite a lot of artifacts in there from the best service loops that I wanted to keep, just to add a little bit of weight. So instead what I did was I went for just a shelf and turned it down. And I remember years ago Mark Spence saying to me, if you're in a club and your bass is too loud, would you filter it or would you turn it down? Well, you turn it down. So that was a really good analogy that's kind of stuck with me. So yeah, I used this instead. Next up, I used a gate, and I never usually do this on drums, but it really helped glue them together. So if I just play it without, if you listen to the top end, it all sounds a little bit messy, whereas when we gate it, it glues it all together. Listen. So it goes from being like quite wishy-washy and loose to really tightening it up. And yeah, I just dialed in these settings until it sounded nice. There was no real science behind it, but I think that made such a massive difference in the overall groove of the track. So if I play this in context with the gate on and off, you'll get more of an idea of what I mean. So let's turn it off. High end's quite wishy-washy, like I say, it's a bit loose. It just really tightens it up. And it really brought everything together. So this was a really cool technique that I used on this, just to get those drums nice and tight. Next thing, we have got a little bit of automation here, just for the breakdown, really, just to filter those drums down. And funnily enough, oh yeah, okay, I've used it over here. I've not got it turned on there, so obviously that's a mistake. But that's by the by. Next, on the drum group, I've just used this a bit warmer. I absolutely love this. It's a stock Ableton Saturate, and it just makes everything sound a little bit better. So again, if we just A-B it, it's quite thin. Just gives a little bit. There's not loads, but it gives a little bit. And then finally what we've done is we've used an audio effect rack, and we've split the signal so we can basically parallel process it. And what we've done is we've used this amp, and we've used the heavy amp. You can find these if you have a look in your audio effects, drive and color and amp. There's all these different ones that you can try. We've gone for the heavy here. And if I just solo that, it's really gritty and grungy. And I really quite like it. It's on full 100% wet. And I just decided to split it up rather than using the dry wet, because then I could EQ it after and get rid of anything that was harsh. So you can hear that's quite harsh. So I was able to just take a lot of that top end out. So we're basically leaving the body and leaving all that nice grit that it's added, and not making the top end too tinny. So that's what I've done here. And then basically all I've done is I would have set this to 0 and just mixed it in until it got somewhere that I liked it. So yeah, if I play this. It's really subtle. You really have to tune into the sort of low mids, sort of mid-range space, but it just adds a little bit of extra presence there, just to give a little bit more thickness to the drums. And that was pretty much it for the drums, really. Like you say, so there's a couple of loops in there, a few different layers of hats and claps and stuff like that, but I tried to keep it quite busy in terms of there's quite a lot going on in the groove, but without adding layers on layers on layers on layers of different things. In hindsight, I could have probably stripped a couple of these out, but that's by the by. The next thing that we're going to cover is the low end. So this is where really the track got interesting. So obviously at this point we've got an idea of kind of the space that we've got to work with to fit a bass line in. So obviously once we've got the drums, if you just add a kick, really ties it in together. And for the kick, I've just used this Aaron Volta Piv kick, which is really, really good. It's like a really beefy 909. I use this a lot. You'll see that I've just made it a little bit shorter by setting this to one shot and turning the fade out on and just basically bringing this in a little bit. Just to get rid of that tail and that sort of like boomy sort of part of the kick, really. So give the bass a little bit more space because the bass note's quite long, so I went for a shorter kick. And then we've got a K-clip on it. You can see here that it's only doing like 0.4 dB of clipping. It was just, there was this little peak in there that I thought I could just get a little bit more out the kick by chopping off. So that's what I did there, just to clip that. And then we've got a Q3 on here. Whoopsie daisy. There we go. There we go. And this is just getting rid of some sort of low mid mud, really, that I didn't want. Just to kind of blend that in with the bass a little bit more. But that was more so to do with the mixdown process, to be fair. You see, I've not put any cuts or anything on this at this point. So yeah, that was the kick, which then brings us on to the bass, really. So for the bass, you'll see, first things first, we've got this minor scaler. And the reason why I've used that is because I've kind of got into the habit more recently of playing my basses in. I feel like I get more of a natural sort of feeling with that. And with this minor plugin, what this does is where you set your bass note, anything that you play that's not in that C minor in this case, it'll either transpose the note up or down, and it will make it so you can't play a bad note. So every note that you play, if you're just jamming in a bass line, every note that you play will then be in the correct scale. So that's a really nice thing to have on there if you do want to get a more natural sounding bass line. For the sound, we've used Wavetable, and I actually just made this up myself. For Oscillator 1, we've used this Saw PW bass. And if I just turn Oscillator 2 off and solo this, you can have a listen to how it sounds. I'll also turn off all of the processing that came after it as well, just so you can have an idea of what we've done with this. So that's pretty standard, really. It's just a saw wave. And what we've done is in the matrix, we've set this filter up here with these settings. And on the filter, we've assigned that to envelope 2. So what that's doing is it's effectively opening the filter really quickly and allowing that sound through to give a bit of a twang. Then for Oscillator 2, we've used this pulse dual. So the two together have got a really nice thick sound. And then obviously we've got a sub on as well, just to give us that bottom end. So after that, that was the bass sound, really. We've then put a bit warmer on it again, and we've done some EQing just to take some of the top end out. And then there was a really nasty resonance that I've had to cut. So that's what's going on there. It looks a little bit crazy, that does, to be fair, and in hindsight it probably is, but in my room there was just a really horrible resonance that was going on in there, so I had to get rid of that. Then what we did that really helped this was put the kickstart on. See how it moves so much more? That's quite straight. Obviously, not only is that giving space for the kick, but it's also actually putting some pump into that bass line, giving it a bit of groove. And then finally, I added a track spacer. So this is a really cool plugin. What this does is you can take in a sidechain from any of your channels. So I've chose a kick here, and then it gives you some settings to nail in. But basically, it shows you kind of where your bass is, if you like, and where you're side chaining to. And what I've done is I've used high cut to only take those lows out, and that's really pumping that bottom end there, and that's giving that like a really clean, it's giving the kick a lot of room rather than just, obviously we've got a side chain in there as well, that's more so for groove, really. But this is really sort of tweaking the frequencies that we wanting to duck. So it's giving us that mid-range presence that we've got from those saw waves, but those subs are really getting ducked to allow the kick through. And it's just really nice plugin to kind of visually show you how that's working and what's going on there. And then we've got our filter here, which is basically just going to be sort of for the breakdowns and stuff. So you can see how we've kind of used that. And then finally, I've got this bass mono. So when we've got basses that are either quite wide, or we might even use a delay on them to give them some groove, I always like to put this at the end. And I've just set the frequency to 100. And basically what that's saying is anything that's below 100, we want to make mono. And that's just to keep our bass really clean and keep the subs in the bass really clean. So for the notes, it's really quite simple. We're only playing 3 notes, but the trick that makes it jump and bounce a little bit is the fact that we jump up an octave. So if I bring these down back to the root and play it, you'll hear that it's nowhere near as interesting as when it jumps. And just that simple trick of moving one note an octave higher really gives an extra bit of bounce in the bass line. And like I say, I played this in, so I would have literally, the minute I found my root note, which obviously I figured out from playing with EVIE stems, was the minute I found it, just jump up one. And it's as simple as that. I've just gone and thought that sounded pretty cool and just left it from there. So that's it for the main bass. You'll see that the next thing that we have then is this filtered bass, which, to be honest with you, just plays the exact same notes. And we're just using a diva for this. We're using the MK Bass FM Hard. And this is giving a load of tension in the breakdowns. If we have a look at the automation, you can see that we're opening the filter cutoff, and that's looks a bit random because I would have played that in again with the controls on my MIDI keyboard. But if we have a listen to that, well, as it opens up, it creates so much tension. You see, it's really starting to get tense now. And that to me sounds really, really cool. So that's what's going on there. And then we have, this is quite, it's becoming quite typical in my tracks at the minute, but we've just got this bow noise. And for this one, there's a load of different ways that you can do this, but I've literally just used Orbits Plus on this Acid Club preset, and that's giving us that. Obviously, that's been quite popular over the summer and was really popular at the time I wrote this track. So I just added that in as a little bit of extra, just to make the second drop different to the first one. So this then brings us really nicely onto the synths, because once I've established the main melody of my record that I'm going to be using in my bass line, for my synths, a lot of the time, all I'll do is just copy that melody, take a few little bits and pieces out, and then use that kind of like as an accent to the bass line. So I'll start with this bass layer here on the drop. You'll see that it's actually playing the same notes as the second bar of the bass, but the first bar is empty, and that kind of gives it a little bit of a call and response. It's kind of like it's talking to the bass line, which kind of keeps things really interesting. For this, I've used the 303, and if you know me, you'll know this is my favourite synth of all time. We're just using the delay saws here, and that's not really doing a fat lot. There's no automation on it or anything like that. The only thing that we've got moving around is just this erosion. And we've just got a little bit of LFO on the frequency. Because it's adding some like top end white noise, we're just sort of moving that around, kind of like a phaser a little bit, I guess. So if we just play that. That's all that's doing. And if we play it with a bass line, you'll see what I mean. It's kind of just playing alongside that bass and talking to the first bar and giving us a little bit of chord and response, which is quite cool. The next thing that's playing in the drop is this main synth here. And for this, we've used the Mono Poly from Korg. Now, we've used the 5th Square Poly preset. I actually really like this plugin. And you can see that we've done quite a lot to this synth. The first thing that we've got is some automation on the shaper box, and what that's doing is it's basically gating certain sections and leaving certain sections. So if we just play that, so it's allowing some to be straight and some to be staggered, and that for me is just giving loads of really interesting variations. So in here it's straight, and it's just basically making that a little bit more interesting. One thing that I like to do with my synths is, instead of thinking about what more can I add, I try and think about what can I do to the sounds that I've already got to make them sound a little bit more interesting and allow those to evolve in the track. Sometimes you don't need to keep adding stuff in order for your track to evolve. What you can do is start taking bits away from it, whether that be with filters or gates like that, or whether it just be applying some core processing to it to make the sections sound different to each other. That way you're still achieving evolution in your track, but you're not having to keep piling stuff on and keep piling stuff on. So that's what we're doing with that main synth. We've also got some automation here on a filter. This is because in this section here, you can see that we've got the vocals playing, we've got the main synth playing, we've got this bass layer playing. There's a lot going on. And when I first sent this to ALISHA, she said to me, like, that section's quite busy. So we solved that by basically bringing the filter down on those synths and allowing space for the vocals and stuff. It just made it a little bit less crammed together. I always try and take on board feedback from my favourite DJs and stuff like that when it comes to these records. Ultimately, these are the people you want playing the song. So if they're going to give some kind of feedback like that, I do try and take it on board. And that's what we ended up doing there. For the breakdowns, you can see that we've got a couple of like dreamy synths here. This one is straight out of Orbits. It's this preset here, this Cheamy Dry. And that is just doing this. It comes in quite hot, so there's a compressor on there just to try and regulate that dynamic range. Not a fat lot else going on there really, just a bit of automation on the filter cutoff and an echo here just to allow it to tail off nicely, just so it's not as abrupt. Then we've got this string. For this string, I have used Omnisphere. So I've just used this phasing Europad preset. Used a little bit of phaser tan on it to move it around a bit. This is quite straight like that, whereas the phaser's really nicely moving it around. And again, I've used some shaper box on this here at the start. And again, this basically gives us that evolution that we were talking about earlier. It allows this sound to evolve without us needing to have multiple sounds. So at the start, it's just kind of a teaser. And then as the track goes on, it obviously then becomes its full sound. So that's what's going on with that. There's not too much to talk about with that string. We've got the bass layer, which we've spoken about. And then the next thing is this gated bass. So I've actually used Trillion for this. And this is one of my own kind of patches. So we're just using this ARP and this 101. And I made this sound for this record. Thought it was really cool. And you can hear that that filter is being moved around by this LFO here, which is making it move. So if I just turn that off, you can see it's really adding quite a lot to that. So yeah, I really liked that kind of effect that had. Using the Tal chorus here as well. This is one of my favourite free plugins that you can get. If I just turn this off, it's quite bland and flat. Turn that on, even though it's only quite, I've not got it doing loads. It just really kind of spreads that out a little bit. And then the final thing that we've got on this is some automation on a gain plugin. And this is because I've wanted to bring the volume of this up in the breakdown. If you're ever automating volumes in your breakdowns, always go for a utility and automate the gain. Because if you start automating the actual track volume, it's going to become an absolute nightmare when you come to mix it down. Because if you want to change that volume, you're going to be fighting against yourself all the time. So I've just used this little utility here just to modulate that gain volume, and all that's doing is basically allowing that to come forward in the mix while we're building up all that tension towards the end of the breakdown to release it into the drop. So that's what's going on there. Finally, we've got a diva channel that's not doing anything, so we don't need to talk about that, and we've spoke about the main synth. So that's pretty much it for the synths. Main things really, like I say, call and response between each other, playing off the bass line, and trying to do some processing to them to make them more interesting without adding more. So next I'm going to start having a look through the effects and fills and stuff that I've used. And to be honest with you, I haven't used a fat lot in this one. It didn't really need it because there was enough atmosphere and stuff going on with all the synths and that. First and foremost, obviously just a 909 crash. This one's just straight out of an old Jeremy Sylvester pack, I think. Yeah, 90s Garage Tools. So yeah, that's just out of an old Jeremy pack. And I've just sort of staggered the patterns. I've left quite a lot of the bottom end in that as well, to be honest. Not really too sure why. Next, I'm just using the 909 core kit straight out of Ableton, and I'm using this mainly for a couple of snare rolls and the ride as well. So if we have a listen to this one, so you can see that we've made that move. We've done a little bit of automation on the filter frequency there, just to sort of fade that out. But we've also done a little bit of automation on the level here. If we have a look at that, so we've obviously just turned that up and brought it right down there. Again, not using the track volume, but the transposition as well. So the actual pitch of the sample is being transposed with some kind of automation here, which is making it go up. So you can see we're going up an octave, just nice and slowly. And that's just basically, again, making it interesting without adding more bits. Then it goes into playing a ride alongside it. And then we've just got the end bit here, which is just a different snare, but doing the same technique as we did, just pitching it up an octave with the transposition here. So if we just open that up, you should be able to see it. There we go. Buried away. Oh, so we're going up 7 semitones there. But yeah, that's kind of giving us a nice effect there with those little snare rolls. I've also then got these tom fills, which I'm really into at the moment. It's kind of like giving an EastEnders vibe, right? But you can see that I've just boosted the sort of low mids just to allow that to really poke through. But then these two kind of work with each other when we get to like the breakdown here. So you can see that we're using 3 of our channels really to get that in, which is pretty cool. And then I've just got a couple of sweeps. So I'm just using one out of Omnisphere that I use in every single one of my tracks. I've actually bounced it down now, but it's just this noisy reso sweep tone, which is kind of, like I say, this is in every single one of my records at the minute, and it's this. You can see it's just sweeping down, and there's a really nasty frequency in there. So if you do use this, just be careful of that. You can kind of just see it there. It really jumps. So yeah, I've really kind of destroyed that, to be fair. And then we've got here just an impact, nothing too special. Then we've got one of the textures we were speaking about earlier. So this, when this comes in, that's really straight. So that's doing so much, and that was literally just from Tantra, as I sort of showed at the start of the video, really. And then we've got a bog standard sweep, and then what I do with these is I literally just duplicate it and hit R, and it reverses it, just to give it a kind of like a up and down, kind of like a V, but the other way, I guess. And then yeah, I've just got those on different channels for when I want it to go down and up, which will give us the V, which is always good for energy. You know, you're bringing it down and then bringing it back up again. And that's kind of what's going on there. And that is it. In the utils, there's just a splice and loop cloud plugins just for if I want to be getting some extra samples and stuff, which I didn't need for this because obviously I had everything I needed from the stems. So that's pretty much it for the track. You'll see that in terms of the mix down, there wasn't loads of stuff that I did in terms of the mix. I obviously processed the drum group together, but the trick for me in this was just picking the right sounds to start with. We spoke earlier about the layers and stuff like that. There wasn't loads of stuff clashing that meant that I needed to do a lot of like firefighting and fixing and stuff in this track. So I kind of just didn't want to overproduce it and overprocess it. When it was sounding good in here, I was just kind of like, I'm just going to try this out. And I tried it in a couple of my sets and it sounded great out. So I was like, I'm pretty happy with this. I often find that if it's good, I'll trick myself into thinking it's not good because I've not done loads of processing to it and put loads of fancy plugins on it. And in the end, I just ruin it and go back to what it was before anyway. So with this one, I just decided to not do that. And I kind of just sent it out to some friends, sent it to EVIE, played it myself, and just saw, okay, what do people think? And, you know, if somebody come back and said, oh, in the club it was a bit boomy or it was a bit this or then I'd go and fix it. I didn't have that feedback. Didn't need to fix it. So the only thing left to talk about really is what's on the master channel. So to kick things off, we've got a high pass filter. This is not really doing anything exciting. It's just allowing us to transition through the track nicely by cutting out the lows. Pretty standard trick. But the next thing that I've got is this filter that's set to around 75 Hertz. And if I press my Command K, you'll see that this is mapped to the equals key, meaning that when I press equals on my keyboard, it turns it on and off. And the reason why I have this set up is because it gives me a really nice way to reference how the bottom end is sounding of this track. So I'm now able to hear whether the bass is overpowering the kick, whether the kick's too strong and you can't hear the bass, and whether there's any clashes there, whether I need a stronger sidechain, whether the track spacer needs adjusting to duck the frequencies more. All of these things I'm being able to tell from just having this turned on. So if I listen to this now, I'm listening out for the balance between the kick and the bass. I'm listening out for any clashing. I'm listening out for any kind of phase issues. And I can really hear that with this filter turned on because it's getting rid of everything else that's irrelevant to me. The other nice thing about this is obviously you'll be able to hear anything that's coming through that you don't want, such as bottom end from snares or anything like that. It's a really nice mix trick that you can use if you're struggling to hear the bottom end properly in your room. Next, we've just got an EQ, as I said earlier. I turned the highs down and the mastering engineer turned them up on the actual release. Next, we've got the actual chain that's going on. So firstly, we've got a multi-band compressor, and this is just sorting out the bottom end and giving us a little bit more in the mids as well. So if we just play this, I'll actually play it with that little filter on so you can hear it. If I turn this off, that's really gluing them together. So, and then the same's happening in the mids. Just giving us a bit more. Then I've got a bit warmer. I've got it set to around 45%. I didn't want it massively overpowering the mix. I'm not a mastering engineer by any means, by the way, but this just worked as a quick chain for me in the club. Next, we've got a couple of things going on here. We've got a low cut at 30 Hertz, just getting rid of all that kind of rumble that you can't really hear anyway. We've got a small boost of 0.5 dB on a low shelf, just giving a little bit more in that bottom end. And then these ones are quite interesting. We've got some side EQ going on, and what this is doing is it's basically making sure that there are no low frequencies spread stereo. So it's kind of what we were talking about earlier with the bass mono. So if we just play this with this on, it's completely mono now. So I'm just basically saying that I only want certain frequencies to actually be hitting on the sides. And then I've turned the lows up on the, the high frequencies up on the side as well, just to give a little bit more air in the track. It's actually a trick I picked up from Fabio at Noise London a good few years ago now. And then we've got two limiters. The reason for this is because we didn't want we didn't want one limiter basically being overworked, if you like. So we've got the first one. It's not doing any gain reduction. All it's doing is bringing the signal up, and then the second one that is doing the gain reduction. And you can see we're barely doing anything really, like maybe 2 dB of reductions, 3 dBs of reductions, and we're aiming for that like between -8 and -9 lux. Don't know why that's showing red. There we go. And then what I've got here is a shaper box. I always like to put this on. And I'll just use the oscilloscope sort of option here, just to have a look. If I'm really slamming it, then I'll be able to see that I'm really slamming it, if that makes sense. If I just turn this down, for example, and really crank this up, you can see I'm completely brick walling it there. So obviously I can hear that as well, but it's just nice to have a little bit of a visual kind of representation that you're not completely destroying your signal, I guess. So that's that. And then finally, I always use a span at the end. You saw me use this earlier on. And this This is really cool for if you're referencing tracks. So more often than not, you'll get people that, myself included, I'll drag a track that I know sounds really good in a club into my DAW, and then I'll try and match the levels as best as I can with the span. And kind of there's a couple of sort of ballpark figures that I'm kind of looking for, really. Sort of minus 30 on my bass and minus 35 on my highs, and I'm usually pretty happy. I know that that's not going to be too much. So that is pretty much it for the DJ Master. Like I said, I'm not a mastering engineer by any means. I probably don't really know what I'm doing too much on that. But what I will say is I played that out in a club and it worked. So you can take from that as you will. And that concludes the video. So I hope you enjoyed the breakdown. If you'd want to see more videos like this, please do let me know. But for now, I'll see you next time.